what we've been seeing over the last year. South Carolina's economy is very stable. We've seen very stable growth over the last year, but it's also been shifting. Stable but shifting. Stable in the sense that we've seen very consistent growth throughout 2014, and South Carolina has really hit its stride in terms of overall growth patterns, but shifting at the same time, meaning that even though we've seen consistent growth statewide, if we look within the state, regionally, and we look across industries, we've seen some changing patterns in 2014 that are relatively new, that we haven't seen prior to that, between 2010 and 2013 during the early part of this expansion period. So that's what I want to focus on today, and we'll go through both of those. This is a map of South Carolina that looks at employment growth over the last 4 years. The areas highlighted, the counties highlighted in dark green, represent areas that have been growing at the highest rates over the last 4 years. Notice that the growth is primarily concentrated in the upstate, in Greenville, Spartanburg, and Anderson, also down in the Charleston Tri-County region, and there's been some spillover from Charlotte as well. So we see York County in particular, the Rock Hill area, clustered around Charlotte. A lot of that spillover effect there. But where else is it coming from? Is it just leisure and hospitality, or are we seeing other new trends begin to emerge in South Carolina as well? Well, let's go over those specifically. Over the last 4 years, there have been about 141,000 jobs that have been created in South Carolina. And so the natural question is, all right, we know where geographically they've been. Where have they been in terms of industry? Which industries have been generating these jobs? Have things changed in the last 12 months? And this gives us a picture of the top 5 major industries in South Carolina in terms of their contribution to total employment growth. But why is leisure and hospitality the major generator of jobs this year? Well, the primary reason, there are several, has to do with consumer spending. Consumers are in a much better financial position today than they have been at any time since 2008. The other area, and the one that's really has seen a sizable increase in its contribution, is the professional and business services sector. Now, this is somewhat vague. This is a fairly large sector, so it's useful to drill down in there and see what's going on. Why are we seeing such a huge increase? And it turns out that the increase is coming from the employment services sector. And it's not just South Carolina. This is not a South Carolina trend uniquely so. We're seeing this throughout the country. On the right, you can see the U.S. trends. We've also looked at it in states across the Southeast and elsewhere as well. And so this is a trend at the national level. If we look at what's happening, is that employers are seeing this as a long-term hiring model, as sustainable and as usable. And so they're not moving back to the more traditional hiring pattern that they had in the past. The other aspect of this, the other cause, is that there is still very high, relatively high uncertainty across the country and in South Carolina relative to what we might otherwise expect to see. With the end of quantitative easing and Fed policy changing, we've seen more fluctuations in worldwide markets. We've seen problems politically with the debt ceiling and other issues between the Congress and the President getting together. So a lot of things going on that create more uncertainty. And uncertainty in general creates paralysis, both from a business perspective. So said another way, if we look at all states and we look at the percentage of exports to Europe out of each state, then we rank close to the top among all states, which is generally a good thing because it means we're more interconnected with international markets, with the global economy, with the European economy. But it also means that we're more vulnerable to being hit in a negative way when we see a global slowdown, or particularly a slowdown in European markets, which right now, shorthand, if you like 2014, then you're going to like 2015 as well, because we're going to see very similar growth patterns. So 2% growth is what we've seen over the last year. Our forecast projects 1.9% for an annual average for the next 12 months. At this point, there are two ways to focus on. Number one, as I mentioned before, manufacturing. South Carolina is leading the Southeast among all states in terms of our growth rate in manufacturing, adding new jobs. And we've seen good paying jobs in South Carolina too. You can see that wages have been growing since 2003 over the last decade in the manufacturing sector. And then the knowledge economy is very important as well. If we look at the high-tech sector, this is the area of the U.S. that, of all regions in the U.S., the high-tech sectors across the country are where we're seeing the most robust income growth.